Nutrien, the Canadian global fertilizer giant, could be in the crosshairs now that Trump is proposing what he calls severe tariffs on Canadian fertilizers. His idea here is apparently to support domestic production and benefit U.S. farmers. But of course, it's kind of baffling because earlier America did move to put tariffs on Canadian fertilizers and then brought them down again. Let's get more from Seth Goldstein, senior equity analyst at Morningstar. Seth, thanks very much for joining us. It does seem confusing, doesn't it? Because Washington initially said, no, we're putting tariffs on Canadian fertilizers, but then cut them. So does he want to do a U-turn here?
Well, it seems like the Trump administration is still trying to work through broader trade agreements. And when it comes to the U.S. and Canada, fertilizer tends to be a large product that is exported from Canada into the U.S. So that's a big bargaining chip for the Trump administration. But I ultimately think if we look at historical precedent, Trump administration has wanted to support farmers. Now, if we're looking at what kind of fertilizers come from Canada to the U.S., there's really two major ones. There's nitrogen and there's potash. Canada has some of the best, lowest cost potash mines, and the U.S. really does not have enough resources to produce its own potash. So I think regardless of what happens, the U.S. would still need to import the vast majority of its potash from Canada, even if tariffs were to be applied. So I wouldn't really see much change there. But with nitrogen, the Trump administration could want to support an increase in domestic nitrogen production, taking the low-cost U.S. natural gas. And that could be where there's some sort of investment or some incentives for nitrogen producers to maybe ship production from Canada to the U.S., or this could just be all part of a broader negotiation, and we see the tariffs get threatened and taken back like we saw earlier this year.
Yeah, it's interesting. The U.S. just does not have nearly the capacity to supply its own potash. We were discussing this earlier, actually, with the CEO of a company called Brazil Potash. There's moves to produce it in Michigan, but that's quite a few years away before they actually get it out from that project.
That's right. We see potash mines take years to build. In fact, if you look in Canada, BHP's been trying to build their new potash mine for over a decade now and still is not close to the finish line. So, new potash mines, this is one of the longer mining project, longer development. And then you look at the U.S. and the geology is just not quite as strong. So you look at higher operating costs, and you may need government support to make the mine viable and profitable, like we've seen in other commodities where the U.S. government has wanted to support critical minerals. And potash is now listed as a critical mineral, so we could see that. But even so, it would likely be years, likely till the next decade, till we start to see a meaningful increase in U.S. potash production.
The U.S. farmers are already suffering because of the trade conflict with China. I know a lot of that's been put on hold, but and China has made some concessions on soybeans, but it's been a rough year for U.S. farmers.
It has been. We've seen fertilizer prices rise, especially nitrogen and potash. We've seen feed and crop chemicals prices continue to rise, and we've seen crop prices generally fall year over year. So for the U.S. farmer, they're getting squeezed on both ends with lower crop prices and higher expenses. And if you add a tariff, that's just an additional cost to the farmer. So that's why I ultimately think we're not likely to see a big impact here, because the Trump administration is going to want to support farmers. That's a big part of the Trump administration's base and what they've historically supported, a group they've historically supported. So I think we're likely to see this just result in either part of a broader trade negotiation deal or just conjecture at this point that ultimately doesn't go anywhere.
Before we let you go, maybe we'll put up a 5-year chart for Nutrien. What is your verdict on the stock right now, Seth? Does it look like decent value, NTR?
We think Nutrien's undervalued right now, and it's one of our top picks in the basic materials sector because we think the market is expecting potash prices to fall back to where they were last year, while we expect potash prices will remain in the mid $300 per metric ton levels. And this will benefit Nutrien, as Nutrien is the lowest cost potash producer in the world, which underpins our narrow moat rating. Also, we like management's recent capital allocation decisions to divest lower performing retail businesses and and potentially sell the phosphate business, which does not generate as strong a free cash flow, while putting money back into the low-cost nitrogen and potash operations, which we think is a good capital allocation approach. So we think shares are undervalued, and we see stronger growth for the company going forward.
Thank you very much, Seth. Really appreciate it. Seth Goldstein is Senior Equity Analyst at Morningstar.